Welcome to Context. I'm Dilek Tuna, and today on the program we will discuss the stark scene in the Gaza Strip. Aid convoys still trickle in, but in numbers described by the UN as a lifeboat after the ship has sunk. Israel has opened a distribution hub near Rafah and lifted an 11-week blockade. Yet as famine and disease spread, Palestinians continue to break into warehouses and flee shelling, even as they queue for food. This week, the criticism of Israel's approach has grown louder and, crucially, from closer allies. Germany, long considered one of Israel's strongest partners in Europe, has called its Gaza policy unacceptable, warning of consequences. So is this a turning point in international tolerance of Israel's war strategy, or is it merely rhetorical pressure with little real effect on the ground? Today on Context, we examine the global fallout, humanitarian implications, and whether Israel's tightening grip on aid distribution reflects strategy or desperation. Our guest on the program to discuss further is Gustavo de Aristegui. He's a former diplomat from Rabat, Morocco. Ambassador, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Good to have you.
Now, do you believe Israel's decision to directly control aid distribution is a humanitarian shift or a deepening of siege tactics under international scrutiny?
I think that they are trying to cave in under enormous pressure from around the world, and not only from former allies, like you just said about Germany, which is a very, very big shift. Let's not forget that ever since the State of Israel was created in 1948, and not a single German chancellor has ever dared made the slightest criticism of the State of Israel. But again, let me make a difference between things, because too often, and we tend to do it ourselves, we confuse the government of Israel with Israel. Israel is a different thing. It's much more important Israel than the government of Israel or the Prime Minister of Israel. Right now, the government of Israel is formed by an extremist coalition, of which, bizarrely enough, the Prime Minister is probably the least right wing of all. But this said, even inside this coalition, there are people that are further to the center, like the Foreign Minister, Gideon Sar, who I've known for over 30 years and is a much more moderate view in these things. But let me also tell you that criticism is also arising inside of Israel. And I don't know if you saw recently a very harsh interview that Ehud Olmert, the former Prime Minister of Israel, of the same party as Mr. Netanyahu, he was a very important member of the Likud party, was clearly saying on CNN and on an opinion, an op-ed in Haaretz, that Israel was committing war crimes. Again, we need to be very precise. The only way that we can help the Palestinian tragedy to evolve to a sustainable, acceptable situation and solution is by being very precise with words. Too many people are saying that this is a genocide. A genocide is a different thing. This can be a very serious violation of humanitarian international law, without any doubt. It could even constitute, in some cases, it's not my words, it's the words of the former Prime Minister of Israel, war crimes. But it is in no way a genocide, and it is no way Israel who is doing it, but the Prime Minister and his allies. This said, again, there are very clear indications that inside of Israel, and opinion polls are very clear about it, between 60 and 75% of the people are against what is happening in Gaza.
Okay. The images from Zawaida this week of desperate civilians storming a food warehouse are being interpreted in two ways: evidence of humanitarian collapse or of disinformation chaos. How do you interpret what we're seeing?
Well, there's three things here. One is the change in the system of distribution of humanitarian aid. As you know, this was in charge of UNRWA and the United Nations World Food Program. This has been shifted partially, not totally, in the hands of private entities, private foundations, and the security is in the hands of the Israeli Defense Forces and some private defense contractors. That is one of the reasons they do not have the experience in such delicate tasks. The second thing is that, of course, the situation is so desperate that people are hoarding to the the warehouses of the World Food Program, and they're assaulting them and trying to take as much food as they can to make their families survive. And the third thing is that there is a great deal of distrust towards UNRWA. You see, in the past, and this is something very important to underline, UNRWA, because of incompetence, because of complicity, or a bit of both, allowed Hamas to confiscate up to 60% of humanitarian aid. Hamas did that with a very clear goal. They were giving their militants, their terrorists, the command structure of the terrorist organization, the larger part of the humanitarian aid, and they were securing fidelities and loyalties with humanitarian aid, and only giving the general population a very small part of it. And then there are organized criminal bands, and nobody speaks about them, that steal humanitarian aid and then take it to the black market. And for example, if a sack of flour costs $10 in the international market, they are selling it for $200. I can't imagine anything more immoral or more monstrous than to trade and to commit crimes with humanitarian aid. So it's a bit of these three things at the same time. And I hope that these new institutions that have been charged with the distribution of humanitarian aid learn the trade. I hope that UNRWA starts clearing its mind and beginning to show the world that they are a UN organization, not a Hamas ally, as unfortunately some of their employees have been proven to be, and to allow especially other agencies of the United Nations that are much more credible as the World Food Program to do and perform this task in a much more efficient way.
Okay, Ambassador, you said earlier on that there was a strong distrust towards UNRWA. Is the distrust not only from outside actors, but also from people inside the enclave? Would you say it's accurate to say that Palestinians suffering these atrocities are also skeptical about the works of UNRWA?
Okay, so let's be very clear. The first responsible entity for the humanitarian tragedy in Gaza is the Israeli government, who is not allowing the humanitarian aid to go in the flow and amounts that are needed to ensure the survival of 2.1 million people. The second thing that needs to be said is that 2.1 million people in Gaza are not the accomplices of Hamas, but their victims. And third, it is very important that those local employees of UNRWA be vetted and screened much better, because we have seen that even some hostages were kept in UNRWA facilities or kept by UNRWA employees. So this is something that everybody in Gaza knows. And everybody in Gaza knows that some UNRWA employees of low level or whatever, in this complicity with Hamas, was giving or channeling humanitarian aid towards the terrorist organization. So yes, they are the main responsible, for the reason that not only abroad, and I am a Spanish career diplomat that knows that region very well. I was posted there for many years. I was even a delegate of Spain in the conference of UNRWA, so I know the organization inside and out. Mm-hmm. And what I can tell you is that when I see the information of independent media, not necessarily Israeli media, of accusing some employees, local employees of UNRWA, of being members or being accomplices of Hamas, it shocks me profoundly.
Okay. All right, Ambassador, let's move on to the next most important topic, I think. Germany's public criticism marks a break from its traditionally cautious diplomatic line. Is this likely to reshape EU responses more broadly, or is Berlin still the exception, not the rule?
No, I think that quite frankly, I see a very big policy shift in many things, even with Ukraine, in defense, in strategy, in economy, in leadership in the European Union. I am very optimistic about the leadership of Chancellor Merz. You see, I am an admirer of the State of Israel. I am a supporter of the existence of Israel in international recognized and secured borders. But of course, this allows us, who are moderate people, that are mainstream analysts, to see very clearly that what is happening in Gaza is unacceptable. And Germany, having been, because of its history, and this is the elephant in the room, has not been critical of Israel in the past. But this prime minister has had the moral courage to do so. And again, not criticizing Israel as a state, or the institutions, or the people of Israel, but the government of Israel. Because the government of Israel and the people of Israel are not the same thing. And Israel is a much more important thing than its government or its prime minister.
Okay. And do you see Israel's recent opening of the Rafah distribution hub as genuine relief coordination or a strategic move to sideline international organizations like the UN?
Well, in my case, or so many other analysts, we have distrust or suspicion towards UNRWA. In the case of the Israeli security forces, they have an outright certainty that they are part of the problem. So that yes, they are trying to sideline United Nations agencies, but they should be very clear. If you distrust UNRWA, don't put obstacles in the path of the World Food Program that have nothing to do with UNRWA and have proven their value, their courage, and their efficiency in so many other humanitarian crises around the world. I am not the greatest fan of the United Nations because it is a very expensive agency and so many times is not been too efficient. But some of the agencies in the United Nations system are known to be efficient, courageous, and well-structured and well-managed. UNICEF is another one. And therefore, they have a huge experience in managing crises and tragedies like the one that we're analyzing here on your program. And therefore, yes, we all need to support those agencies, not all of them, those that have serious flaws and that have been accused of even crimes, should be sidelined, but not all of them. And I do think that maybe the complete replacement of the distribution of humanitarian aid by private foundations has not been a completely good idea. They want to complement it to be able to have more amounts and more and a greater deal of flow of humanitarian aid, be it.
Okay. Now, given the UN's stark warning that Gaza is effectively in freefall, are we seeing a turning point in global opinion or merely a shift in tone without consequence?
No, it is not without consequence. It is a very big shift of tone, as you say, and it's very clear, and it's been happening in a very fast and deep way in the last 2 weeks, and especially over this past weekend. And this week we have seen very major shifts in I wouldn't say in the opinion, because a lot of people had this opinion, simply they did not express it publicly. And I think that the shift of the position of the German government is extremely important. But a lot of other governments have, when 2 permanent members of 5 of the Security Council in a meeting with Canada, that is the United Kingdom and France, that have been very supportive of the existence of the State of Israel and absolute enemies of anything that has to do with terrorism, and themselves victims of horrendous terrorist attacks, as we, the Spaniards, have been in the past. When the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the President of the Republic of France say that what is happening in Gaza is unacceptable, that is not an insult against Israel, and that is not an anti-Semitic comment, and that is not being anti-Israeli, like, unfortunately, Prime Minister Netanyahu said. That is simply preposterous.
Okay. Now, the German Foreign Minister mentioned that withholding food and medicine violates international humanitarian law. In your view, should such statements be followed by tangible actions like suspension of arms sales or sanctions, as he's threatened with?
Israel is in a very delicate situation, and if you suspend arms sales to Israel, then you are making it weak in the face of other very powerful enemies, and they could very clearly take advantage of this situation to attack Israel. That would be a very irresponsible move. It would be a huge mistake of strategic consequences beyond our imagination. So we have to be very cautious and very prudent about what is going on in this part of the world, and be extremely firm in demanding Israel a more humane approach to the conflict in Gaza, but not necessarily apply blanket sanctions to the whole population and state of Israel, because that weakens the state of Israel, not this government. And I really resent and criticize the comments of governments, even like the Spanish government, that are trying to promote sanctions or embargoes against the state of Israel. If you want to do something, continue criticizing the Prime Minister of Israel. You cannot leave Israel undefended. That would be in itself also a crime.
Okay. With only limited access to northern Gaza and continued strikes in the south, is there any meaningful space left for humanitarian neutrality or safe zones?
This is one of the biggest tragedies, as you know. 93% of the infrastructure and homes in Gaza have been destroyed. This means that there's hardly anything left. And the majority of the population of Gaza has been displaced not once, but many times. So they've gone from the north to the center, to the center to the south, then again to the north, and again to the center, and they're being displaced all the time because the Israeli armed forces are telling them that they're going to attack this place or that. So they don't know really when this is going to happen, if it's old news, if they really mean it, if their neighborhood is affected, because nobody has real coordinates anymore. You can't know exactly in which part of a certain neighborhood that used to exist and doesn't exist anymore there's going to be a strike. So I'm afraid that, again, the civilian population of Gaza is the first victim of this tragedy. I fully support the idea of defeating Hamas, but it can't be done at the expense of the well-being and the security of 2.5 million innocent civilians.
And do you think these pressures from the UN, the US, and now Germany are making any dent in Israel's military or political calculus?
Listen, you just mentioned one thing that we didn't comment on up to now, which is the US shift. It is very clear, and even inside the United States government, and we've seen this in different media and, in confidential newsletters and what have you, and even my conversations with some friends in Washington, D.C. have told me very clearly that President Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have supported clearly Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in his efforts to try to obtain for example, viable agreement with the Iranians that will protect Israel from having an Iran that is armed with nuclear weapons. At the same time, it was harshly criticized by the hard right of the American political panorama. And on the other hand, the United States President, Mr. Trump, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have made it very clearly. Of course we are against Hamas. Of course we want to defeat Hamas. Of course Hamas is a terrorist organization. But what is happening in Gaza is a tragedy, and we cannot allow 2.1 million people to starve to death. So it is a very clear thing. And I do think that so many people criticize with a superficial analysis President Trump. There are things that I have criticized even on your show many times. For example, the trade wars that have been initiated, whatever else you want to include in that list. But the truth of the matter is that if there's any actor in the face of the earth that can effectively pressure Prime Minister Netanyahu and his most radical allies into accepting a viable solution, a humane solution to the tragedy in Gaza, this is going to be the United States, and this is going to be President Trump.
Okay. Now, Ambassador, you did touch on this earlier in the piece. The humanitarian disaster is accelerating, but so is internal dissent inside Israel. How do you see public opinion shifting both within Israel and globally?
Oh, the public opinion in Israel has been shifting ever since they were very critical of how the security forces, the intelligence, and even the army reacted to the horrendous attacks of October 7th. But it wasn't the moment to criticize them. They had to wage a war against a terrorist organization. So everybody left this for later. But 600 days into the war, people are beginning to criticize the way that this has been conducted, the tactics, the strategy, the long-term view, because there is no plan for tomorrow. They don't know what they're going to do with Gaza. Definitely displacing 2.1 million people is completely out of the question. In the same way that doing that would not be genocide, it would be ethnic cleansing. Again, you have to be very precise with words. So yes, there is a very big shift, even inside of Israel. This is why probably politically, and I resent that, of course, as a former politician that I was and ran for office many times, you cannot subordinate your personal political gains or future to the greater good. And the prolongation, the artificial and tragic prolongation of this war to benefit the political goals of Prime Minister Netanyahu is simply immoral. So actually, if elections were held in Israel tomorrow, you would see a much different government coming out of those elections. And this is a reality. Of course, in the rest of the world, this shift has been happening for many months now, and it's going to continue to deepen. And even some very staunch allies of the State of Israel have made a very clear-cut difference between the State of Israel, the people of Israel, and their present government. I do that too.
Okay. And if there's no immediate ceasefire or significant escalation in aid, what's your assessment of Gaza's humanitarian trajectory over the coming weeks?
If there is not a significant increase in humanitarian aid immediately, then some of the most credible agencies of the United Nations systems and independent NGOs around the world have been saying that at least 500,000 Gazans will be in danger of suffering a level 5 humanitarian hunger catastrophe. 5 of 5 possible. This would be famine. This would be famine for 500,000 people. This would be horrendous.
Okay, Ambassador, thank you so much. As always, it's a pleasure having you on the program.
And sorry for the interruptions. I know that we're on live, but well, that's what happens when we're live.
That's right. That's okay. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Now, as Gaza's humanitarian disaster deepens, a new kind of pressure is taking shape, not just from activists or human rights groups, but from the very governments Israel counts among its allies. Whether this reshapes policy, halts arms, or simply adds to the moral ledger of this war remains to be seen. But on the ground, in shelters, hospitals and food lines, the toll continues to rise. And the question of accountability, of humanity, of responsibility grows harder to ignore. That's Context. I'm Tuna. Thank you for joining us.